Okay, did you figure that out? I hope you got that right. More importantly, I hope you're understanding the whole execution context concept. All right, let me display the console. Undefined 10, undefined 100, and 110. And now we're going to walk through that. So let me place the code up here, and I'm just going to resize that a bit so we can see the console as we walk through this. So first thing that happens is the global execution context is set up. When that occurs, it scans for the var keyword and function keyword. We have a var keyword here. So sum is set up as undefined. There's no functional keywords that it sees. And so then it starts phase 2. But also remember, the global object is set up, which is window in this case, and the value of this is established, which points to that global object. Now we begin phase 2. So a value is added to the variable sum, and it happens to be this function. That's the value that's added to it. And then we invoke sum. We have the parens after sum that causes it to invoke. And so prior to this invocation, what we have on the call stack is the global execution context, basically. That has been set up. Now we add a new execution context. We add this function to the stack. And the first phase of that occurs. So we scan for var and function keywords. Num is established in memory and set to undefined. This function, since this is a function declaration and not a function expression like this outer one, this function declaration is established in memory. Continuing on down, we have another var. So new num is established in memory and set to undefined. Now we're going to talk about this in just a minute, the value of this. But let's go ahead and go to phase 2, the execution of this function. So the first thing, console.log num. So we go to the memory location, grab num. Right now it's only undefined. So there we get undefined. Next line, we set a value to num. And so now num is equal to 10. That is placed in memory. Continuing on, we get down here, console log num. That should log out 10 now because that has a value established. And there we get 10 on the console. Now console log new num. Well, new num should be undefined as well because we haven't gotten to this line yet, so we haven't established a value for new num. So we get undefined. Next thing we do is we set new num equal to, and notice what we're doing here. We're invoking a function. I'm going to put a semicolon at the end there. We're invoking this function, so we've just established another function execution context and put it on the call stack. And it goes on top of this one. This one's not done yet. The sum function's not done yet. But now we start setting up that execution context here. And so first phase, we have a var keyword there. So new num is set up in memory and it's set to undefined. Now this is a different new num than this new num here. Right here, I should say. Because this is a different execution context. This new num belongs to this execution context for the sum function. And this new num belongs to this execution context. So that's a new memory location and it's set to undefined. Nothing else there in our scan, and so we begin the execution phase. So first line, we set new num equal to 100. So now new num in this execution context is set to 100. We log to the console, new num, and so we get 100 here. Now we return new num. It places that 100 into this new num variable in this execution context. So now that's equal to 100. And because we returned from that function, that execution context is removed from the call stack. Then we have our last line. We continue with this sum function, we have our last line, console.log, num plus new num, and so that is 10 plus 100, that equals 110. And so that is the final item we get logged to the console. So that is how the function execution context works. Until we complete a function, it is not removed from the call stack, and that execution context remains. And we've seen that it goes through the same two phases as a global execution context. But what about the value of this? Is this set up as a part of those function execution contexts? Well, let's look at that really quick. I'm going to add a console log statement here. And I'm going to log out this. And I'm going to add one inside of this function as well. And log out this. Now we know what it does for the global execution context. It points to the window because we're working in a browser here. So let me go ahead and save this and let's see what we get. Notice we still get the window in both cases. So why is that happening? Well, the value of this depends on how the function is invoked. And the value of this is set to the object to which the execution context belongs. So right now, the execution context for the sum function and the getNewNum function belong to the global object. And so the value of this becomes that global object, which is window. Now, a bit later in the course, we will dive deeply into this in more detail and look at situations where the value becomes something other than the global object. But that would require a different object as that function's parent. But we'll talk about that later. We got plenty of other things to continue talking about in this section. So let's move to the next topic.